Tom Moore. We're about to do this interview where, in retrospect, several years later, we talk about this film, which of course is a bit of a Rashomon experience because everyone has a different viewpoint. Everyone did then, everyone does now. It's also a little like looking at memories after you've looked at a photo album. Hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Actor Phil Bosca.
I was so unhappy. So unhappy, I can't tell you. You should interview my wife sometime, and she'd tell you.
You always looked happy.
Well, I was acting. I was acting better off stage than I was on. There she is, Kath and Andy, as did big handsome Dennis, my old buddy Jimmy, the lovely Randy, she's a sweetheart, and Jane. Wonderful Jane. She's so sweet. And my gosh, I look stuffed into that, don't I? I always hate to look at myself on film. The wonderful Carol. She was really the remarkably wonderful lady in that, I tell you. She was so sweet. And all the time we spent together, I don't know, it must have been the better part of a year, I didn't see or hear her do anything that you could criticize or say that was unpleasant. She was just fantastic.
Chris and Carol were interviewed about our film by National Public Radio.
Carol?
Hello?
Would you do another Broadway show?
Sure, but I'd only want to do matinees.
Playwright Ken Ludwig.
For some crazy reason, it struck me as funny one day to have a scene where the company gets mixed up as to what play they're putting on, and half of them think they're doing Private Lives and half of them think they're doing Cyrano. And I had that image in my head. And then I happened to be mentioning it to a friend. He said, "Oh, you're crazy. Why don't you just write that? It sounds really funny. Write that play."
Thank you. It's Elizabeth Williams, the lead producer.
Ken sent it. I took it up to Connecticut on a weekend and sat in a chair and read it and cried with laughter. I don't think I ever did that again with this show.
It's true.
I had done Ken's play, Lend Me a Tenor, which Jerry Zaks directed. There's our esteemed director, Tom Moore, with whom I had some difficulty. He wasn't originally the director. When I had done the original reading, Jerry Zaks was the director. I remember going back and forth to my agent. I can't remember the details, but I remember calling up and saying, "Do we have a starting date? And who's playing, this and who's playing that?" And suddenly he said, Jerry Zaks dropped out, which signaled to me that we were in trouble.
Producer Rocco Landisman.
Elizabeth Williams, who was the originating producer of the show, had a relationship with Ken Ludwig in Crazy for You. So she knew Ken, and it was natural that Ken would give her his script. She read it, she liked it, wanted to produce it, and then came to Heidi as a co-producer.
Set designer and producer Heidi Ettinger.
I'd worked with Tom on a couple of things over the years, varied projects, most of them actually not really comedies, it turns out. Night Mother was one, and we did some Chekhov. They're very successful shows, and he did an extremely good job with them. He was very meticulous, and I thought very devoted to the projects. He'd always loved farce, sort of split-second timing that's involved, and was very fond of the structure of the show, because it does have a classical farce structure.
Tom Moore.
When I came onto this, I'm pretty sure that the reason I was brought into this was because of Heidi and Rocco. I know at that point that the play had already been offered to Jerry Zaks because he had already done a reading. I had grave reservations myself when it was sent to me. I knew there were a lot of problems in the play. I loved the play, and Rocco and I had a conversation. I have to say Rocco's the one that really convinced me to do it. He kept talking about the fact of it being a love story of the theater anyway, and I came around to that way of thinking. I know you're not going to believe this, but I enjoyed every single day. I had bad hours. I had bad moments at night occasionally, wondering what to do next. But in retrospect, given the fact that there were so many already undercurrents going on, of which I only became aware later, it probably was not the wisest professional move I've ever made.
Ken Ludwig.
I enjoy the camaraderie. I enjoy working with great professionals. It's everything I always dreamed about doing with it as a kid. I mean, I have to pinch myself. Here I'm working with Heidi Ettinger, then Landesman, working with Rocco, working with Carol Burnett.
Check for $500,000. Go put on your play.
Wait! Here's a check for $250,000 to put on your play, brother, because I'm no longer a grouchy-wouchy.
This doesn't look familiar. What part of the show is this?
This was what Carol's been doing for the 30 years.
Well, young Carol Burnett. That's Bernadette Peters?
Yes.
My gosh. Shouldn't look all that different now.
No. Everybody looked the same. Nobody had seemed to have changed. In fact, when we started this film, we thought we were going to be doing a version of the Carol Burnett show, and it would be, everybody would be happy.
Right, I remember Victor Victoria with Julie Andrews, and they were friends. Buscarelli never came in. That's the St. James. That was one of ours, Grease. Crazy for You.
When I had done the original reading, I'm not sure how many weeks or months before this point, the role that I was playing was the leading role. Then I kept getting intimations of this actress was mentioned and that actress, all prominent Hollywood types, all, not actress, New York actress types, Hollywood types. And I began to think, wait a second, this is going to change the kind of dimensions of the role. And then when they got the superstar as Carol, I figured, well, this was in trouble. And I had serious doubts about doing it. I wasn't sure that the play then would be what I had envisioned, because I didn't like the play to begin with. I thought it was poorly written, but the role was great, and I figured it's a leading role. I'm being very frank now, and I don't mind if you mention this. It was a leading role on Broadway, and you don't turn leading roles on Broadway down very easily.
Tom Moore.
Heidi and Elizabeth are both pretty amazing women. I had known Heidi and consider Heidi to be one of the smartest people in the American theater. In fact, if there is an unsung hero of this production, it's Heidi. As a side note, I remember asking Heidi, why are you staying away from all the cameras? She said, well, they did a documentary on my family, and I know the dangers you can fall into here. She's smart in all ways.
And he'll, of course, be doing it probably right up until opening night. Anyway, if there's anything you need that, you're in your dressing room and it's a horrible color, something.
See how upbeat everyone is, how jovial?
Yeah, I see.
People think of show business as fun, as, one sort of constant lark. And I think watching this movie, you understand how much stress and anxiety and fear and tension there is in the production of a show. It's real work. As you get toward crunch time, it gets more and more intense and less fun.
It's kind of like the launching party for the Titanic.
Yes.
I am a huge fan of Carol Burnett. I have been a huge fan of Carol Burnett and will be a huge fan of Carol Burnett. Probably a huge amount of my comic sensibility was formed watching her hour show. I believe it was on Saturday night. And I know there were difficulties that she felt and conflicts with me, and I feel particularly sad about that. I know there were conflicts with Phil also. That's just one of those things that happens sometimes. Chemistry is a big thing in the theater.
And I just couldn't resist it.
Wendy, what was the deal on filming here? There was some problem with the union in being allowed to shoot all these actors. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. Essentially, they allowed us to come in for 2 weeks and shoot, and at the end of the 2 weeks, the cast would vote whether we could continue shooting or not. If we could not continue shooting, we would have to burn the film.
Burning the film was an empty threat. They hardly even noticed us after the first day. They were so busy learning their new lines.
George is in pain. During the following few minutes,
Heidi Ettinger.
Everybody looks so innocent. You look at them now, they have no idea what's going to follow, what's down the road.
Everybody wants it to be funny. People are laughing much more than they would ordinarily. I mean, you have all of these people are connected with the show, and they all have a vested interest, and the playwright laughs at everything he's written. And there's a certain naturalness to that.
I was laughing so hard, I couldn't hold the camera still, and I thought, this can't be this funny. And then it never was that funny again. I was amazed.
I had the same reaction, too. Well, see, you are laughing. Good.
We laughed at this.
Yeah, no, it's funny.
I'm pledging blood. You expect me to be celibate all my life? 3 days! You couldn't be celibate for...
I always get a lot out of all these readings. You can just tell, you can sort of tell from the tenor of what's going on when they're with you.
Here we are. We're at that very moment, which is one of the moments I find painful to look at, because these are the most intimate conversations a director and an author have, and to a certain extent we may have been crazy to let you in on the first one. You hear me say that we need to really beef her up. I'm talking about two things. I'm talking about Carol's part, and I'm also talking about Carol's persona as the grande dame. You also hear me attempting to reassure Ken that it's going to be all right, and I simply try to tell him, and these are the famous two words that I'll live with for the rest of my career, that I would give anything to have out of this film, when I say it's television. What you don't hear at the end after I say it's television is she'll get it.
I did 11 years on my own show, and I've worked on television, which you would think would be harder and more cutthroat and, you know, whatever. But I never had people worry that much before. If you have fun, the success will come. You gotta loosen up. We all got into this business in the first place because we were pretending when we were in the sandbox. We were pretending to do this. We were play acting as kids or directing or whatever. You know, let's go put on a show in the backyard for the neighbors and stuff. And when we lose that sense of fun, we lose the creative process.
It can be, but it can
Norma
be.
Desmond.
Exactly, but it can just be. The play, when first written, was written as a starring vehicle for a man. Everyone else was a supporting character. And rewrites, even before I got involved making it a two-hander, and then, of course, once a major star was involved, making it a very equal two-hander. It was really originally written for Phil Bosco. What you also don't know is that it was supposed to actually go on the previous spring. There was a great deal of pressure, and Phil Bosco was not available at that time. And I remember that was one of the things I pushed very hard, was to wait for Phil, because I thought he would be the anchor of the production and would be a good foil for Carol Burnett.
Farce, well done, of course, is very, very tricky to do. As is comedy. That's the old cliche. Dying is easy. Comedy is hard.
Oh, we were so close, George. We almost made it. And now it's too late.
After all these years.
We were so
Elizabeth Williams.
I had met Carol years before when she had done Love Letters in a production that I produced in Los Angeles. We did a long-running, the weekly rotation of Love Letters, and Carol did it several times. I knew she was looking for a show, so we got it to her, and she loved it.
Did she think in terms of it as being her return to Broadway?
I don't believe that she actually conceived of it in that way. I think
That's interesting.
I think she thinks of herself as someone who works all the time, and she loves giving these lectures around the country.
Stop it! Snatch yourself. Don't you know they know what's going on? I don't know. It might be too shticky. After all, this is not a shtick-laden play.
No, there's no shtick in this. It's very simple.
It always is very.
The rehearsal period for me, and I think for many actors, if not all, is the most exciting and the most obviously creative and the most enjoyable time of work. That's the one that you really get into it and you feel like you're an actor contributing and doing things. When the play opens, it's a certain, for the public and then for the press, there's a certain excitement, but that fades very quickly. And then it's a job. I don't mean to be, mundane about it, but it becomes work, and it's hard work. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of, but to begin, so I look forward to the rehearsal period. And that rehearsal period that we had in New York and in Boston was excruciating. For me particularly, and I think for some of the others. I'm not sure, I can't speak for them.
Nose indicates a great man.
I really enjoy rehearsals. I enjoy that time. To the extent the film gives other impressions, because one sees the pressure and you see it from so many viewpoints. I think that was what was interesting watching the film for me also. For me, all of these times are great. I mean, do we argue now and then, or do our tempers flare? I'm sure I look silly as can be, and that's just part of the process. And I just remember having lots of fun.
Today we've got some victims coming.
What was it like to have the cameras always rolling?
After a while, you forgot about it. Much of the time, we weren't aware of it. The time that I was is when I kind of am talking in the car and in the dressing room and things like that. But when it came to the rehearsals and the performing of the play, forget it. They were invisible.
Today, just if something doesn't work, don't take it to heart. Let it go. Okay. I always tell that to Carol.
She thinks of herself as someone whose home is television. And she had always made it very clear to us that she wanted her counterpart in Moon Over Buffalo to be someone who, from a theatrical perspective, was classically trained. She wanted a real pro. She's the ultimate professional, though, too, I think we should add. I mean, she really is an unbelievable hard worker when she does make a commitment to something. And she made a real commitment to this show.
Mandy, come outside, darling. The view is wonderful. I'm still damp from the bath.
It was like an ocean voyage somewhere.
And you're all on it together.
Yeah.
Heidi describes it as a big snowball rolling down the hill.
No, I was thinking more
toward a warmer climate.
No, it's just that when you embark on it, that you're running in front of the snowball, which is picking up speed and chasing you and getting larger and larger and larger, and inevitably it will get to the end of the hill, but there's no way to stop it. And its role is so much determined by the personalities of the people that are involved and the meshing of their chemistry. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
That's true.
Look at them there. They're not really all laughing at everything. They just had a shot of a woman holding her head because she was laughing so hard at one thing. They weren't laughing like that at all of them. I can see they still have reactions that are pretty genuine. When a laugh is a big laugh, you know it, and it just...
You can't fake it.
Can't fake
I
it.
do want to say something in general. That's
This
great,
is
Mike.
where Carol and Phil and everybody want to express some things for Ken, and he's on his way out the door to go down to Washington. Phil wanted very much to discuss with Ken the fact that he felt that there was too much of a build when he goes into his big farce routine, and that he had no chance for breath. And it really concerned him. It concerned him physically, and it concerned him as the play. And I think Ken wasn't ready to hear that at this point.
I'm fully aware of when you work as long as Ken must have worked on this and thought about it and all, it's not easy to have somebody come right away and within a week, you've worked on it for 3 years, let's say, lived with it, slept with it, done it 18 different ways, and then some actor come in and say, look, this isn't working. And you say, no, do it, please, do it. Do it. And you do it. You're not, unless you're a pain in the ass like whom? Barbara Streisand or somebody.
When actors make suggestions, you get tons of them, and if you implemented every one, you'd have no script left, and you have to pick and choose what you think will work. And then sometimes when we're in previews, we try them out and see what works in front of an audience. We did that a lot in this show, certainly. You don't get to be where Phil is and Carol and Rocco unless you're really smart and know the theater and know what works. So you don't just listen to it perfunctorily. You really listen, try to, and say, okay, I want to hear. But ultimately, I've got to make the decisions on the text.
One of my great beliefs in the theater as a director is that the playwright, after working on something for 2 to 3 years, deserves the right to see the play he wrote before it starts being torn apart into 1,000 pieces.
You know, my two heroes living are Woody Allen and Tom Stoppard.
She was making love with Laurence Olivier, and I was making fire. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not getting this.
To do Carol justice, not that she needs my defense or explanation, but she was repeatedly asked to do things which kind of called upon her expertise and whatever you would call Carol Burnett's shtick, you know, and she resisted that. She really tried to resist that for the most part. And I used to speak to her about it. She wanted to be a good soldier and do within the constraints of the script what the character required rather than do what eventuated when we were in trouble. Do the Carol Burnett show, yeah.
It's a back and forth give and take, but it's not easy because we're human beings as well as craftsmen. You know, there may have been only one genius at work on this production. That may have been Carol Burnett. But the rest of us are really major craftsmen and I think really do a good job, but it's basically trying to figure it out beat by beat.
A little more graphic. I don't mean boffing Laurence Olivier, but something where it's quicker, the sound is
I
quicker.
took careful notes of every single thing that the actors said. I passed them on to him. He incorporated some of them. Some things he wanted to wait until he saw a run through, and that seemed to be more than fair.
This play is not going to be improvised. I'm just telling you. First of all, 90% of this play
It was a meeting to talk to Ken. I was pretty protected. I had warned Ken. I knew that they were unhappy about a lot of things. I had told the actors they should get everything they wanted out, and then I set myself up as a lightning rod to a certain extent by saying the words, "It's not going to be improvised." And from then on, it really became a confrontation between Phil and I.
This is the point where I felt I had to speak because I was unhappy. Remember now, we're still in New York, and I don't think we've been rehearsing for 2 weeks. We were being told to do it and shut up. Trust us, we kept hearing. Trust us. It'll work. Trust us. And we do it. We trust, we do it, and it wouldn't work. Our obligation as serious contributors to this is to say that. Carol and I and Jane Cannell have done lots of shows, and you get a feeling for that kind of stuff. You know, you're supposed to be funny. I mean, I can be funny. I know there's something about me that's funny. And when I do something that's supposed to be funny, it's not working, I naturally immediately think there's something wrong, that I'm doing something wrong, and I'll examine it, and then I'll do it again, I'll try a different way, and it's not working. You have to say, something's wrong here.
I say to make Rosemary happy, to make...
I just adore Philip. He was absolutely right. We did feel sat upon.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a lot of room for experimentation. It was we were kind of under the thumb of the director and the writer. And I was kind of surprised because the way I like to work is that's what rehearsals are for, is to experiment.
The actors always feel that ultimately that they have created the play. Well, of course, the playwright feels that he created the play with some justification. And the actors always want to be the authors as well. They feel they're saying the lines, they have to be in character, they should have input on what those lines are, and it's always a source of tension with the playwright. Some playwrights encourage a certain amount of improvisation and ad-libbing with the text. Some playwrights hate it. But it's always a battleground, and we saw that right away at the outset here. If the producer originates the project, he thinks it's his play. The director, who's in charge of it on a day-to-day basis, thinks it's his, and the authors who wrote it think it's theirs. Always a problem.
It was tough working in the theater, even though they kind of didn't pay a lot of attention to us, so we could go around pretty much where we wanted. But our deal with the union was we couldn't plug in any lights. We couldn't use anything in the theater except what we could kind of carry in our pockets, which limited us a little bit.
Were you happy with the set?
Was I? Yeah, it was okay. No, I thought the set was okay. I loved the move that it did.
Yeah,
I thought that was really fun to watch and entertaining.
It's so theatrical at the top of the show.
Yeah, no, that part was fun. I like that a lot. I mean, it's essentially a box set, and you can't mess with that. I think it would have been a big mistake to make it abstract it, because it's about this very real people in a very real place at a real period of time, and you can't get too cute about any of that.
Ah, God. I thank you, and my back thanks you.
You both are welcome.
We hated this bit, and it eventually went. It seemed to be an obvious gag to get her to climb on my back, to do the number, you know. She eventually didn't like it either.